Hi, all. Welcome to the Developing a Regional Value-Added Dairy Training Center webinar. We're just going to give it another minute or so as people continue to join. And one of our presenters is having a bit of a technical difficulty, so we're going to see if we can get her on here in just another minute. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all so much for joining today. My name is Laura Ginsberg. I am the Dairy Strategy and Innovation Manager at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And in that capacity, I also lead the team who runs the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center. And this project is one that has been years in the making, not just the actual research over the past year and a half plus, but also in feedback conversations and other learning since well before 2020. I'm so proud of the work you are here to learn about and hopeful for the next steps to breathe life into the center. I do want to note that this effort could not have happened or been as successful without the help of dozens of people, some of whom who are on the call today. Over the years, I've learned and been inspired by many of you. Thank you for your time and energy, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'll hand it over to Shana Cohen from KKMP, who will be leading the webinar.
Thank you, Laura, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people here today, and to those of you who were a part of this research, who participated in the survey, participated in interviews, I want to thank you so much for all that you've contributed, and to all of you for being here today to hear about this work. What we're planning to do today is to introduce the project team and go through the project background and methodology. We'll share what we learned from that methodology, the findings, the research questions that we asked, and the insights that we gained. And then we'll spend the second half of the webinar talking through the concept, how all of those findings and all of that work synthesized into a concept for a regional value-added dairy training center. Our goal today is to provide an overview or a tour of the various elements of research and findings for this concept for the center, and to kind of preview the report, which will go into much more detail on everything we're about to share. And that report will come out in the next couple of weeks. As we go through today, there will be 2 times when we'll welcome questions. Please post questions in the chat throughout as you have them. After the key findings and research findings are shared, we'll welcome your questions, and Laura Ginsberg will be moderating the chat and taking those questions at that point. And then again at the end. So don't be shy, put your questions in the chat, and thank you again for being here. So as Laura said, I'm Shana Cohen. I'm managing partner of a food systems consultancy called KKMP. We are a 35-year-old firm that does work focused on design, development, implementation, and evaluation of a really broad range of food-related programs, initiatives, and enterprises, working across sectors and across food supply chains. For this project, as we do for many projects, we customized our team to build in the kind of expertise and additional perspective that we need to do a good job on this project. We worked with Liz Thorpe of the People's Cheese, who I hope will be able to get into this team's webinar and present with me today. Liz has 25 years of experience in the specialty cheese industry, working with cheese makers and major national distributors and retailers on business development, sales, and marketing, and worked in close partnership with our KKMP internal team throughout every element of this project. We also had as an advisor from the beginning of the project to the end for the 18-month span of work that we did, Jeremy Stevenson. Jeremy is currently founding a new cheese making operation, Tucker Hill Cheese, and also has served on the board of the American Cheese Society as president and on its education committee, as well as on the board of the Vermont Cheese Council. We were honored to have Dr. Paul Kinstedt as well as an advisor to our work. Dr. Kinstedt is an emeritus professor at UVM at the University of Vermont, and has spent a 37-year career teaching and conducting research and providing service to cheesemakers in cheese science and on cheese history. He was also the director of the Vermont the Vermont Institute of Artisan Cheese for the 10 years that it existed. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we go through. And we were honored to have on our team BJH advisors as well, who are real estate development advisors and strategists who supported our work on the location analysis of this study, which we will share with you in a bit. So a bit of background on this project, where it came from and why it came to be. As you all know, New England value-added dairy products have earned a very strong reputation for excellence regionally and nationally over the course of multiple decades now. And past NEDBIC research has shown that public investment in dairy processors is going to be needed to secure that well-earned reputation, to help the industry grow and change as the industry around it changes, and to cultivate the next generation of master producers. So the purpose of this study was to think about a solution to that question. How should that investment take shape, and what would a center look like if there was a service center, a New England-based service center for value-added dairy education, product development and support, and training? As I mentioned, for 10 years, New England had such a center designed to meet the needs of that time, the Vermont Institute of Artisan Cheese, from around 2004 to 2014. This study builds on the history and learnings and producer memory of what that institute did and it meant to the industry. You'll hear us mention VIAC, which is its acronym, over the course of this presentation a couple of times, and really to determine how to build on that history. Specifically, how is the need different now in the face of market forces as they change, and industry consolidation and industry requirements that are really increasingly challenging for small and mid-scale producers in value-added dairy, and how to make a center serve a region and the full value-added dairy product range, cheese and beyond. Specifically, in our work, we were charged with assessing the need for a value-added dairy training center. Is it needed? If so, what kind of physical facility should it have? And what kind of location? What are the highest priority things that it should do and offer? What are the key assets and infrastructure and organizations and programs and expertise that already exist to meet some of the needs that folks are talking about? And once it exists, what should be the best fit organizational structure, the real estate rationale, and the revenue model? And what kind of partnership would be needed to sustainably operate the center? To do that work, we did a broad range, we employed a broad range of kind of methodologies over an 18-month timeline. And we did this through an iterative research and design process. What that means is that we would do a certain amount of research, talk to people, conduct the environmental scan, do some distribution mapping, start to do case studies. And as findings started to coalesce in one way or another, we would start to develop a concept for what a center would look like. We would then take that into the next round of interviews and stakeholder engagement, test, refine, conduct more research, and repeat. So that it was quite a collaborative process with the many stakeholders who were involved in the research. Our question was not just, is a center needed, but what kind of center is needed and what kind of center is feasible for this region?
Shana, I just wanted to let you know that Liz made it in.
Fabulous. Welcome, Liz. And thank you all for going with the flow as we figured out all the technology here. In a second phase of research, we really zeroed in on refining and interrogating the concept of what a center could look like and turning it into a plan. We did a survey that had 55 complete responses, 83% from New England and the Eastern New York region. We did another 20 interviews on top of the 40 or so conversations we had in the first phase of work, and collaborated strongly as a team and with the NEDBIC to interpret those findings and translate them into clear analysis and a recommended model. So what did we find? Again, our research was focused around these broad questions that I talked about in introducing the study. Does it need to exist? And if so, what should it do? What exists already that it could build upon? What kind of facility is needed? And if it had a new facility or if a place were to be chosen, where should it be located? How should it be funded? And who should lead a newly created center? Going into the first research question, Does a new center need to exist, and what should it do? Liz, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks so much. I'm really thrilled to be here with everybody and have a chance to share our findings from our work over the last year and a half. Our first question, is such a center needed or desired? And the answer was unanimously yes. This is a relevant and viable concept. And the feedback we heard from makers is that a centralized support center is not only needed, but would be utilized by value-added dairy processors from across the region. We could go to the next slide. Great. Makers are broadly aligned about the types of trainings and services they require. Broadly, these areas of need fall into 4 content buckets. The first is introduction to value-added dairy production. The second is food safety and regulatory compliance. The third is business planning, and the fourth is product and process improvement. Given the wide range of topics, makers did acknowledge that different kinds of formats would be necessary, with some trainings better suited to in-person instruction and others viable for remote instruction. The point that really rose to the top in many of our conversations is that expert consultation is king. Makers are looking for a one-stop shop for targeted one-on-one technical consultation across a variety of topics. The possibility of that resonated very strongly with the makers we spoke to. People talked a lot about their awareness of outside consultants and even their engagement with outside consultants, but the ongoing difficulty that they articulated was connecting efficiently, finding the right people, and not having to reinvent the wheel, doing the same work that other makers across the region are trying to do. We had many questions that came up in the course of our report, but some examples of questions that producers said they would ask of a technical consultant if they could access one efficiently are, how do I create a robust testing program? Who can I hire for a pre-audit audit? What are best practices in affinage for the style of cheese that I make? How can I get my bacteria counts down? What new strategies can I try to improve my recipes? Or even how do I analyze my business's books and the larger market to identify a good time and way to scale my business up? As I mentioned already, and you'll hear us say this again and again, the format of support that the center would provide must be adapted to the content area and to the producer soliciting assistance. Different kinds of training and support can and should be delivered in different ways for maximum efficacy. This includes remote and in-person, one-on-one and group, trainings that are conducted in third-party offsite locations, as well as in producers' own facilities. And finally, many of the people that we spoke with are are owners or managers of their value-added dairy processing businesses. And they returned again and again to the point that different people need different kinds of support and training, different strokes for different folks. Business owners and their employees have different technical assistance needs. They're both important, and ideally, a center like this would be able to service both audiences. Again, further reinforcing this idea of differentiation in training type and delivery method.
The second research question really focused on what exists already and what would need to be built and developed for a new center to exist. And our first finding related to that question is that resources for producers do exist. Finding and vetting them is the key challenge. Makers acknowledged on every call that there are a lot of resources that exist and that they depend on quite regularly. But as Liz mentioned, finding them is the challenge. There's a lot of reinvention of wheels and inefficiencies that they don't have time for, and trying to find the right fit technical consultant, the right training for the right need at the right time in the right order. Having a one-stop shop with curated content and a built-in guide would be critical to helping them access what they need. As mentioned, existing assets and resources abound in the region and beyond, but there are gaps. And there is also value in strategically connecting those assets that do exist in the value-added training and services, value-added dairy training and services landscape. In that case, management and coordination kind of a function is the key piece that helps producers access what exists in the landscape, helps them understand what they need and when, and would really prevent a new center from rebuilding wheels, unnecessarily duplicating or unnecessarily competing with strong existing services that exist in the regions. We also asked the question of what kind of facility would be needed if a new facility were built. And we found that there's broad consensus among producers that offering services through a network of third-party sites offers benefits that a central new facility doesn't, while also avoiding some key risks. In the conversations that we had over the course of the research, there was a lot of hesitation about the idea of building a brand new facility. And that hesitation came from a lot of sources and for a lot of reasons. Producers and their advocates and partners were concerned that a brick and mortar facility would be expensive to build, it would be slow to build, it would be a static facility that could quickly become irrelevant as food safety protocols or consumer trends or supply chain requirements started to shift. Producers worried about growing to trust a center that provided services and training to them that wouldn't be able to access funding to cover high capital and operational costs and would thus not have the longevity that it needed. But even if that funding were limitless and if longevity could be promised, small and mid-sized makers across the region said that they really prefer to learn in real facilities with their warts and all, as opposed to in state-of-the-arts research and training facilities that aren't like anything they would ever operated in. They talked about how much they love visiting and learning in their peers' facility and in near peers' facilities that give them a sense of what might it look like if I scaled up to the next level of supply chain reach or of product diversity. A lot of stakeholders described the abundance of commercial facilities, businesses that run their own creameries, universities that have creameries, nonprofit organizations that operate commercial kitchens and creameries. And those are producing value-added dairy around the region and could be leveraged sometimes for teaching and learning. So when we say a range of third-party sites, that's the universe that we're talking about. Some of the benefits to this are that third-party training sites will be growing and changing as the organizations that operate in them and that run them grow and change, and that would create a kind of a nimbleness and responsiveness and energy to the center. A decentralized center would also be able to serve everyone across the region and beyond by not being in just one location. And in doing so, it's a model that could really generate goodwill and access to funding opportunities and resources across multiple states. Compounding the energy for a decentralized model is that producers indicated that they're reluctant to travel for training, and most said that they couldn't travel for more than about 3 hours each way to a dedicated facility for a training if they were offered in that location. And that related primarily to concerns about costs from lost time and operations in their own business, costs of lodging and expenses related to travel, in addition to just the travel and tuition itself. I also just a quick note on the graphics that we're showing. The report that will be released in the next few weeks has a lot more graphics and a lot more detail on this research, on findings. Here we've just put up a couple of examples. You can kind of see some of the research that we've done and have a sense of what's to come. So while geographically dispersed third-party training sites offer a lot of logistical advantages for participants, the model does present its own risks. And there's precedent and evidence that a dedicated facility for standardized, experiential, hands-on training opportunities would bring a lot of value to a center. These third-party sites are desirable for all the reasons we said, but most might not be suitable locations for a longer form, more intensive hands-on training, say a 5 to 7 day hands-on training to introduction to making value-added dairy products. That kind of intensive, longer form, messier kind of a training is really best conducted in a facility where an instructor can intentionally introduce problems for the purposes of teaching people how to mitigate those problems and deal with them. A facility that can handle a multi-day curriculum and not be overly put out and bear too many costs associated with stopping production or pausing or changing production during that time period. And a facility where a host organization's food safety standards wouldn't be compromised by a training taking place within. So considering the idea of a dedicated facility for that kind of hands-on learning is also a critical consideration for the center. We also looked at where a center should be located. Milking and processing operations are clustered around the region in ways that do predict densities of demand for the center's services. And as we've just talked about on the last handful of findings, we're de-emphasizing the importance because stakeholders de-emphasized the importance of one new facility, one new central facility. But our phase 1 research did look at where should a center's operations be, or where should they focus if something were to be built or if services were to be focused in one or more places. We're not going to go into a lot of detail here, but wanted to just show a couple of the maps that we did and let a little bit of this wash over you. Those who are interested can, of course, read more in the report. Central and southern Vermont form a natural hub of densities of potential demand for a center like a value-added dairy center with a large concentrations of dairy agriculture and also value-added processors. But there are spokes that are well defined too, with significant concentrations of producers in South and Western Maine, in Central Massachusetts, and to a lesser degree in Eastern Massachusetts, Central Connecticut, and Southeastern New York. All of these are locations to consider and portions of the region to consider as a SANU center would search for and develop relationships with hosts and third-party training sites.
Our fifth research question is the million-dollar question. How should a center like this be funded? Our research has shown that producers are willing to pay for training and support, but not enough to unilaterally finance a center like the one we're describing. We heard throughout our interviews that makers' budgets are very tight. This probably does not come as a surprise to most people on the call today. We also heard that money could be found and would be found to pay for good support and good training. There may not be a training budget today, but that money would be located if there was a place to use it. That being said, corporate sponsorship, public funding, and or philanthropic dollars will also be necessary to close the gap between revenue production coming from training and the cost of bringing this center into being and running it over time. Part of our team's work was to put numbers to this reality, building a predictive financial model that incorporated feedback from makers about what they could and would pay for different kinds of training, estimating expenses and layering in expectations about a working timeline to really understand what the funding gaps are likely to be. And finally, our last research question, who should lead a newly created center? There are multiple viable frameworks to house and lead the center. Our team's recommendation out of all of these possible models will be explored more in the second half of our call as we describe what the center should look like. But two dominant forerunners emerged pretty early in our research. The first was that the center should exist as a net new nonprofit. The second, that the center should come into being under an existing entity or organization. This second model is the favored model that our team is recommending we see this as the preferred structural way for a center to stay true to its mission, to target regional geography rather than have any perceived or actual bias toward one state or another, and to enable access to the broadest possible range of funding types, from earned income to industry sponsorship to grants and state budget earmarks. And we will talk in greater detail about what we think this should look like. But I think for now, we're going to pause and see what questions we can answer regarding the first phase of our research.
Thanks, Shana and Liz. For everybody on the call, there is a Q&A option. It should be in your menu bar for you to be able to access and type a question into. At the moment, we do not have any questions. And if folks want to ask a question and they can't figure out how to work Teams, because it can be confusing, feel free to send me an email as well, and we'll make sure to get your questions asked during the next break.
Yeah, the raising hand icon might also be an option. I don't know. People can use that, but I guess we can continue on and start to dig in greater detail.
It looks like we have a question from Allie. If you can unmute yourself, I may have to unmute you. Let's see. It doesn't look like I can unmute you at the moment, Allie. So if you can type your question into the chat. Okay, it says Q&A, says it's not available for this event. Okay, so my email, if you can put things in the chat, that's great. Thank you. That's a good solution. Yeah, put things in the chat and I will monitor that going forward.
As somebody who struggled mightily to get on this call, I will say there's like a little talk bubble at the top of the screen with lines in it that says chat. And if you click on that, you can type your question in and press return. And then in theory, we will be able to see it, or Laura will, I guess. I don't know if I will, Shana, but.
Perfect. Yeah, let's just keep going and I will monitor the chat going forward.
Perfect. Feel free to put chats in about anything we've presented so far and ongoing what we're about to present. So all of the research that we just presented to you and all of those findings, we synthesized together, tested with stakeholders who are producers, trainers, advocates, and potential partners in a center like this. And all of that resulted in the concept that we're about to share with you for the New England Center for Value-Added Dairy. So what is the center? New England Center for Value-Added Dairy will be the premier go-to destination for training, technical troubleshooting, and provision of business services, serving small and mid-sized value-added dairy producers of all products across New England, across the Northeast, and it can and should also serve makers of this type from across the nation. We were able to speak to guilds and associations and makers from other parts of the country as well, and did find a number of commonalities that lead us to believe that there's demand for a center like this that would be accessed by producers beyond the region as well. Some of the offerings of a center like this may be relevant for larger producers in the region as well, and should be. Programming will exist for business owners, for their managers, for workers, for aspiring workers, those who want to get into the industry, and for entrepreneurs who are seeking to start to be makers. The center's staff and advisors will have their fingers on the pulse of an industry and on industry trends, and will be able to diagnose and address makers' needs and adapt center programming as industry changes. The center will curate and integrate and help makers find their way to the best existing trainings, trainers, resources, consultant expertise, and technical assistance from around the region, the nation, and the world. And the center will also create new programming when that's needed and when that's relevant. When group in-person teaching is a part of what the center offers, it will take place not at a central newly built facility, but at a range of satellite partner facilities across New England. These will be existing facilities, commercial, academic, or nonprofit, that are suitable for learning and demonstrations. And as we talked about in the findings, one satellite location will be a facility that's suitable for hosting a longer form intensive training programming. In all that it does, the center will lead with technical excellence. It will avoid promoting or prioritizing any particular product, personality, set of values, or philosophy of value-added dairy production. At its start, its key content areas will focus on excellence in technical production, food safety strategy and diagnostics, production process improvements, and business planning and management skills. And notably, it will approach all of these content areas as inseparable from one another, which is how producers experience them.
How does the center work? What does it do? The center does many things simultaneously. It is both curator and creator of content. It is diagnostician of problems and guide to finding solutions to those problems. When a maker reaches out to the center, picks up the phone, sends an email, the first point of contact that they meet with is a case manager. The case manager exists to diagnose the maker's needs and problems and direct them to the appropriate resource or resources within the center. That could mean many different things. Resources may be existing programs that are already out in the world today that the center has curated and vetted, building a database of these existing resources that evolves over time as they change, as they go away, as new programs come on board. The appropriate resource might be a new training program that the center has created. Our recommendation is that the first original content that the center develops and makes available to makers is a multi-day cheese boot camp, a la VIAC. For those of you who might have participated in VIAC or remember it. But over time, the center would create other pieces of original training and content. For example, a seminar on financial planning for artisanal dairy businesses, or a one-day class on cultured butter making. Again, these training programs might be one-on-one, they might be group, depending on the problem. They might be held remotely or in person, depending on the need. We've mentioned one-on-one several times, and I think this is particularly important for the technical assistance that so many makers spoke about wanting and needing. Things like recipe troubleshooting or food safety or microbiology specifics are going to be very unique to each individual producer, the products they make, the facility that they operate in. This kind of technical advisement will be delivered by a suite of technical advisors who work under the center and can work remotely or in person with makers, depending on the types of problems they're experiencing. As the center matures, it could even offer shared services. We heard many makers in our phase 1 interviews talk about how great it would be if they could all keep their supplies in one place, benefiting from being able to buy things in bulk and get lower prices, or how helpful it would be if they could outsource their bookkeeping needs or get help with marketing. So we actually imagine a runway in which over time the center could evolve to offer these kinds of centralized services for multiple makers across the region. What are the initial key content areas and how are they best delivered? Shana mentioned earlier that the report, which is quite long and detailed, has many different charts and graphs and tools to translate the information that we gathered. This is one example of feedback we received around one content area of focus and priority. This kind of feedback helped us understand, what kind of business planning services were most important to makers, and how would they best like to receive support on those kinds of questions. But there are many other examples for all of the different content areas. What's important is that there are key priority areas that makers are aligned on. And within these, we see opportunity and need to deliver different kinds of training and support in different formats to different audiences. So just to run through, I'm a pretty concrete thinker, so I like specifics, to give some specific examples. The first area is basics of production and risk management. So in our conversations and in our survey, this encompassed things like milk characteristics, production processes, food safety and sanitation, equipment usage, and workplace safety. I mentioned already that our recommended prioritization for content is that the center launch with a multi-day cheese boot camp, similar to the VIAC program, but quickly thereafter begin to add shorter subject matter specific classes, such as Introduction to Sensory Evaluation or Introduction to Yogurt Making. Across the board, this kind of content would be primarily group programming delivered almost entirely in an in-person experience. There may be some facets of a multi-day class that could be held remotely, but for the most part, this is going to be a group live area of support and training that the center provides. This content area also, just to kind of note opportunities for growth and evolution over time, we see that this area offers the ripest, no pun intended, area for expansion, particularly in two directions. One is that this area could evolve into a certification program for the industry. The other sort of area of expansion and evolution is that this kind of original content can be adapted to an enthusiast audience rather than a professional audience, expanding the potential revenue base for the center. The second area of content is product and process improvement and troubleshooting. I don't think Shana mentioned this before I hopped on, but in the beginning of our work, we were talking about this area as research and development, as R&D. And really what we heard back from makers is that they don't so much need and want to go off to a research facility to work on the development of a net new product to the market. Whey-based energy drink, for example, that really what they wanted and needed was personalized, customized support around the improvement and optimization of the products that they're already making today, or similar products like that they might want to expand into making. So this area of product and process improvement really is going to be an area where the center is focused on one-on-one consulting and support, delivered primarily through this suite of technical advisors that I mentioned earlier. So some examples in this content area might include facility design and optimization, recipe refinement and troubleshooting, or milk characteristics and microbiological analysis. Why is this weird thing growing on my cheese? I've never seen it before. These areas of training and support would be hybrid. There's a lot of opportunity to deliver this kind of support remotely. Opportunity to talk on the phone with a consultant and not have to be in person. But also an opportunity for a maker or a creamery team to have in-person training and support, likely at their own facility. The final area, bucket content area, is business planning. And again, thinking about the different audiences that this center can and should serve, we imagine business planning will be directed primarily to owners and managers of value-added dairy processing businesses. Some focus areas include financial planning, capital access, marketing, and distribution. And these would be disproportionately would be remote group sessions, though there's always an opportunity to dive deeper with a one-on-one work with a technical consultant around the nuances of business planning.
So with all that it is poised to do, the question that we next looked to answer was, what is the type of organization that should house the center or be the center? How should the center be structured to do what it wants to do best? More than 10 pages of the final report that will come out in the next week or so are dedicated to analysis of what kind of operating structure makes the most sense for the center, that would allow it to live into its mission in the purest, most autonomous way, that it would allow it to adapt to an industry that is fast changing, that would create an efficient and fast path to startup. And as Liz mentioned at the end of our findings, the two top options were create a brand new nonprofit that is the center, or bring the center into being under the umbrella of an existing organization. We've developed organizational charts, conducted analyses of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for each approach, mapped out milestones and a timeline of what we think it will take to get to an operational, revenue-generating center. And in doing all of that, our team came to a clear and decisive recommendation that the center is best brought into existence under the umbrella of another organization. There are risks to this approach, but the additional cost and time that's required to launch a net new nonprofit is one of the key reasons that we think bringing it into an existence through the partnership and support of an existing organization is better, but also because a net new nonprofit would struggle with a weaker fundraising position, as it's an unknown. It would seek to build relationships, it would seek to build networks, it would seek to prove itself and define its reputation, and all of that would slow down the center's ability to thrive. We see a lot of kinds of possibilities for the type of entity that could house the center. And this is a part that's very exciting about the next steps and where this opportunity and this program grow from here. The center's umbrella entity support organization could be a mission-aligned nonprofit. That could be a nonprofit that focuses on food systems. It could be one that focuses on food business strength or support. It could be focused on agriculture and food businesses. It could be focused on education and training. Or it could be a for-profit company that's invested in launching a mission-driven nonprofit training arm. Whatever organization it is, and however it takes shape, an RFP process is the process that we're recommending to identify the best fit partner of this existing entity. And that RFP process and the applications that come in, the purpose of that would be for the existing entity to demonstrate their alignment, their mission alignment with the center, to demonstrate their stability as an organization, to describe the kinds of supports that they could offer the center, and very importantly, to describe what they would expect to receive and achieve in return, the kind of benefit and win-win that they would expect from partnership through launching the center. Regardless of the type of entity, our research has shown that this embedded approach will be the most cost efficient and will be the fastest for what will already be a somewhat slow process. We think 18 to 24 months to get to program offerings under the best circumstances. And I'll turn it over to Liz to talk about what we think human capital will look like under a center.
Thanks, Shana. So what kind of human capital will a center like this require? You can see on the slide an example of an org chart. Again, there are many more explorations in detail in our final report. But here broadly, I just want to talk about the areas of function that will be required for this center to come into being and to grow and thrive over the years to come. The center needs staff capacity focused in 4 areas. The first is executive direction, fundraising, administrative leadership. The second is program direction, content creation and delivery. This is sort of like sexy stuff, in my opinion, the stuff that makes the center special, the services and the content that it is gathering and bringing to the market that don't currently exist. The case management, the navigation support to help a maker figure out what the problem is and figure out what the best path to support and resolution are. And finally, administrative support, things like bookkeeping, HR, marketing, website design. One of the big reasons that our team is recommending the center come into being as a subset of an existing entity or organization, as Shana described, is cost and speed of speed to market. And under an existing entity, 2 of these 4 areas are already functioning, and could absorb a lot of the requirements of a center. So executive direction and administrative support are already in existence. And really this means that the center itself is going to instead only have to focus on 2 key hires to begin pre-launch and sort of pre-opening work. To talk a little bit more about those 2 roles, the center's director is the person we imagine overseeing curricular strategy and development, probably someone with broad operational experience in value-added dairy processing, and somebody who can function as a bridge between the existing organization's executive directors and administrative support, and the manager of the case manager. The center's director would be very tapped into the maker community, to the satellite partners, and to the technical advisors, who we're going to talk about a little bit more in a minute. And then the second role that would be needed out of the gate is the case manager role. Even in a pre-launch, before the center is open and fielding questions, we see the case manager as critical to really begin amassing the brain trust that the center will represent, understanding what's out in the market now, how it works, what programs the center wants to recommend to makers, existing entities and programs that the center might want to partner with, and really sort of understanding at a very deep and nuanced level what the existing landscape looks like. And then, of course, over time, to begin to be that guide and resource as makers reach out to the center. In addition to these 2 salaried positions, the center will rely on contracted hourly technical consultants. These technical consultants are subject matter experts in high demand areas like microbiology, food safety, facilities, packaging, profitability. These technical consultants are sort of we imagine a stable of them that the center can deploy for one-on-one consulting with makers. These are also experts who might contribute to or lead group curriculum in their respective areas. But again, to reiterate, these are not staff, they're contracted hourly workers, and they can be deployed as needed, remotely or in person, giving the center a lot of flexibility and making it a lot more nimble while offering very broad and deep expertise and capacity. Once the center is up and running, we are recommending that an advisory committee be created to really anchor the culture and priorities of the center, and that these technical consultants play an important role on that advisory committee. Earlier in our presentation, Shana talked about the importance not only of having services across different areas of need, but really understanding how these different areas interact with and influence one another. The reality is that makers, these problems don't exist in vacuums. The facility impacts the food safety, impacts the ripening process, and you really have to think about it in a holistic and interconnected way. The advisory committee exists to help the center do that, to really be its brain trust and inform its priorities for ongoing curriculum. Additionally, it's really important that the center's director have support and advisement as they kind of evolve and grow the center, and really to help advocate for the center within a larger bubble of the entity or organization that, that would bring it into being. So we see those technical consultants as really critical partners and contributors to the center.
The next question we'll talk about is, who are the satellite partners and how will they be selected? And I'm aware that we're running short on time, so I'm going to try to just share some of the top key points here, and we'll then talk about next steps quickly and then answer any questions that you have. So throughout our report and presentation, we've talked a lot about the center's utilization of a network of decentralized satellite locations for in-person group trainings when that's the right format for delivery of a training. The satellites are an extension of the center, and they're what really allow it to serve a broad geography without investing in one brick and mortar location. Satellite partners won't be teachers, and they won't be expected to share their proprietary practices or their recipes for what they produce. Rather, they're hosts who will provide their facilities for in-person classes that will be developed by, coordinated by, or conducted by the center and its staff or expert trainers that it brings in. They'll be compensated for their time and for the use of their facilities for being a host and satellite. Satellite partners will be selected through a request for proposals, not unlike how the umbrella existing entity will be identified. And the ideal satellite partners are going to be those kinds of entities that have the bandwidth to be and want to be regional leaders in excellence of value-added dairy production. They don't need to be perfect or state-of-the-art facilities. On the contrary, they should be facilities whose owners and operators anticipate and manage challenges and drawbacks and are willing to be transparent about the limitations that they face and how they manage those. That said, the satellites should have demonstrated commitment to sanitation and record keeping and production best practices. And all of that should be demonstrated and brought to light through the RFP process. The report outlines quite a bit more about the detailed requirements and responsibilities of the satellite partners. We think it's a really exciting opportunity for infrastructure operators around the region to be an embodied part of a center as it comes to shape.
What comes next? As our research team hands off final deliverables to NEDBIC, we're providing timelines and milestones. You can see an example here on the slide to bring this center into being, to take it from an idea on a piece of paper to a real world thing in the Northeastern United States. The NEDBIC will be convening a launch committee, and the launch committee is going to be charged with shepherding this project into being. We estimate that their work will take 18 months. And over that time, the launch committee will bring together a group of passionate and attentive individuals with a network of contacts, a network of organizational alignments, and a variety and diversity of skills and talents and strengths that will come together to do a couple of key things to get the center into existence. The first is rally seed funding to fund the center. The second is to really advocate for and raise awareness of the center and enthusiasm for the center across the industry. The third is to steward the RFP process to attract and identify and select a well-matched, mission-aligned entity that can support and benefit from launching and bringing this center into being. Throughout that process, the launch committee, again, is really charged with kind of protecting the center's interests in finding the best win-win partnership for the center. And finally, to inform and support the recruitment and hiring of those first two key hires, the center director and the case manager. And at that point, really, the center will be at its kind of pre-launch kickoff point. It will have a home, it will have funding, it will have its two key hires. And at that point, the launch committee will, I guess, will disband and the center will begin.
So to summarize what we've shared here, the concept for this New England Center for Value-Added Dairy that we have designed and described is complicated, and it's complicated by design. And it's complicated because the needs of the producers who would depend on it are multifaceted, overlapping, and as unique as their product mixes, their facilities, their staff, and their operations. The center will, as its mission, be the connective tissue that fills content and service gaps with new offerings, that catalyzes an excellent regional portfolio of expertise and resources that already exist, and that makes all of these assets function like an ecosystem for the benefit of businesses and for the benefit of the industry that they together form, built on partnerships to serve the industry as it grows. So we'll stop there and take any questions. Laura, if you'd like to voice questions.
Sure. We have a couple from the first half, and some of them are related. People are wondering about the focus on the New England plus Eastern New York region and not the balance of the region represented by the NEDBIC, particularly because there are a number of aligned scaled producers and processors in that region that was not included.
We focused on the New England region and eventually added in a portion of Eastern New York as well. In talking to people, realizing that some of the businesses in Eastern New York are forming supply chains and tapping resources and are expressing characteristics of small and mid-scale businesses and the needs of those businesses in a way that aligns with the 6 New England states. The RFP that the NEDBIC put out requested a focus on the New England states, which is why we started there, with the idea that it's a somewhat geographically isolated region. The producers that operate within the region experience a set of needs and market challenges that are somewhat similar to each other. And we talked to producers from Maryland and Delaware and Pennsylvania and Oregon in the course of this research, and they have a lot of needs that align as well. And that's another reason why we think the satellite model is a really interesting one, because while the satellite model and the center would start with a New England base, there's absolutely no reason why it couldn't and shouldn't scale to a broader region that could be the other states that the NEDBIC covers within its purview or others within the nation. It's an eminently scalable model to meet the needs of producers that are across the region and the nation. So the way we thought of it was really New England as a region of particular character and need, but also as kind of a starting point for a center that would serve a much broader geography.
Thank you. We have another question about if you could just provide a little bit of detail about the types of processors that you spoke with, and if the report will outline any differences of findings between those different types of value-added producers.
Great question. Liz, do you want to field this one?
I mean, yes, I think you probably know the numbers off the top of your head better than I do in terms of how many of butter versus ice cream versus yogurt versus cheese. But we talked to all of those people, and we were lucky enough, grateful enough to get responses across all segments of value-added dairy processing to our survey. And so we did mention kind of the final report goes into a lot more detail about the responses that we got to the different questions we asked. And we're able to segment that by many different characteristics, including like the type of producer that was responding. So a lot of that is captured in graphs and charts coming out of our survey. I don't know if you want to add more number specifics to that, Shana.
That was a great summary of the survey, and the methodology does include a summary of the characteristics of the respondent pool that gives you a really solid understanding of where in the region or in the country people are located, what they produce, and whether they identify as an existing business, an aspiring or newly starting business, and some other characteristics as well. As Liz said, in interviews, we ultimately talked to about 60 different people in the course of the research, seeking balance across size of business, across maturity of business in terms of number of years of operation, scale of supply chain reach and market channels, and the product range and regional distribution. There is a skewing within the New England region towards cheese and towards densities and concentrations of businesses in Vermont. And that's reflected in our interview pool and in the survey, but we made a concerted effort to make sure that we had representation across the New England region, the broader region, and across product mix.
Thank you. I'm seeing that we're just a minute after 10 o'clock, and we'll wrap this up. I know there's a couple of other questions around the umbrella organization and its evaluation for alignment and management. There's another question about the types of centers that the research project looked into, and I can confirm quite confidently that both of those questions are addressed in a lot of detail in the report. So I would encourage you to look into that report when it is published next week. I do want to say immediate next steps for the Dairy Innovation Center team is that we are hosting the Northeast Dairy Innovation Summit on March 10th and 11th in Albany. I'm going to put the link to that event in the chat. Shana will be leading a workshop at that summit to go over the research, have conversations, and start to initially line out who the advisory group members could and should be. So if you are interested in continuing this conversation, and if you're just generally interested in what's going on in dairy across the region, I would encourage you to attend this summit. Our sponsors have helped us keep registration rates very reasonable for a 2-day event. The Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center is committed to stewarding the group to keep this project moving forward. We deeply understand and are committed to the effort that has gone into this work and the real need that's been surfaced for the groups of producers and processors that a center like this would benefit. So stay tuned, stay in touch. We will be working on this over the next few months. The summit is our next touch point, which is in about 5 weeks to keep the work moving forward. So at this point, I want to thank Shana and Liz and for all of you joining us today. Thanks for hanging with the different technical challenges that we experienced. I appreciate all of your time and attention. The report and the webinar recording will be available next week on our website, and we'll be posting more information about that as soon as we have it available. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.